the webinar.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'll speak when I'm on. Colin. Well, I'll start. Aloha attendees, welcome to this session. And I'm Roger Jelinek, Executive Director of the festival. And I look forward to this session particularly. I just want to tell you that in case your friends have missed this, they will have access to it as it is being simultaneously recorded on YouTube and Facebook on the Better Tomorrow Speaker Series YouTube channel. And then it will be video edited for highlights, and those will appear on our website. And again, the Better Tomorrow Speaker YouTube channel for probably the entire next year. So there'll be plenty of opportunity to have access to it. So now, with further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Maya Soetoro-Ng and enjoy the show.
Thank you so much, Roger. Aloha, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here with you. I'll start with a brief land acknowledgement, acknowledging Hawaii, where we sit as an indigenous space whose original people identify as Kanaka Maoli. The aina on which I sit is in the Ahupa of Waikiki on the Mokopuni of Oahu and the Pai'aina of Hawaii. And I recognize that Her Majesty Queen Liliuokalani yielded the Hawaiian Kingdom in these territories under protest to avoid the bloodshed of her people. I further recognize that generations of Kanaka and their knowledge systems have shaped Hawaii in a sustainable way that allows us to enjoy her gifts today. I really feel privileged to be with you and exploring this topic, which is important to many and valuable to all. First, let me speak a minute about the tough stuff of this time, sort of what brings us here. Obviously, a lot are working from home, homeschooling children. The lack of physical contact with family members, friends, and colleagues has been hard for many. Mental health challenges have also resulted from or been exacerbated by the extended periods of fear about contracting COVID-19, lockdown, worry about losing job, paying rent and mortgage, as well as the anxiety, depression, and grief that can come when we lose people or see loved ones struggle and suffer. People working in vulnerable spaces like healthcare workers are at an increased risk of mental health challenge due to the environment, sometimes long hours without adequate protection. Some during this pandemic have taken to abusing alcohol and other substances as a means of coping. And of course, people who had pre-existing mental health conditions are dealing with increased stress, as well as often the inability to get adequate support or medication. I am on the Council of Allies for the Domestic Violence Action Center, and I know that there have been increased incidents of family and intimate partner violence, which results in mental health conditions as well. DVAC reports that since April 2020, they faced enormous surges with 50,000 client contacts, 10,000 safety plans required, and 25,000 children being impacted. And there have been new tactics and types of abuse: coercion, threat, intimidation, emotional and economic abuse, minimizing, blaming, isolation, and so on, that has been creative and unprecedented. So all of that is pretty grim. That being noted, we here believe that from the mud can grow beautiful lotus, and from suffering can come resilience and post-traumatic growth. So today, my hope is that we will learn about the struggle, yes, but also about solutions, commitments, new understandings, and resilience. As one of our panelists, Allana Coffee, shared in an email to me, the pandemic has been an opportunity she sees for deep reflection and great growth for some, life-changing devastation for others, and varying experiences of both. And so a lot of us are thinking now about how we have coped as community, as nation. And together, I do believe that we can shape a healthier and more thoughtful future and build greater happiness. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Gerald Bush joined the faculty at UH Manoa in August 2019 after retiring from psychiatric practice in Houston for 27 years. He's a professor of psychiatry and associate director of addiction psychiatry. He serves as the forensic psychiatry site director for residency training at the Oahu Community Correctional Center, as well as director of medical education and patient care in the Queens Medical Center emergency department. He is behavioral health patient safety officer at Queens Medical Center as well. He's worked as the staff psychiatrist at the Hawaii Homeless Healthcare Hui in Chinatown Joint Outreach Center from August 2019 until its closure due to COVID. This was a walk-in clinic for the houseless downtown, and Dr. Bush has studied the person-to-person transmission of substance use disorder and the history of models of substance use disorder as a communicable disease. We also have Allana Wade Coffee, PhD, who's the graduate of University of Hawaiʻi, earning her PhD in educational psychology in 2004, and a re-specialization certificate in clinical psychology in 2012. Since 1995, Dr. Coffee has worked either as a consultant, educator, counselor at the Department of Education, the Academy of the Pacific, Kapiolani Community College, Chaminade University, the University of Hawaiʻi at Manoa, and Kaiser Permanente. Currently, Dr. Coffee is in private practice, serving adolescents, adults, couples, and parents. She and her husband, Jerry, founded the Honolulu Psychology Collective. And Dr. Coffee is active in several community nonprofit organizations, including the Brain Injury Association of Hawaii, Pilot Club of Honolulu, Hawaii Psychological Association, and she serves on the Diversity, Equity, and Steering Committee. Dr. Jessica Rosenfeld is our third panelist. She is a licensed clinical psychologist currently practicing at Manakai o Malama, which combines modern and traditional medicine as a part of Community Health Collaborative. She earned her doctorate of psychology from the University of Denver and is a member of the National Register of Health Service Psychologists. She works with a variety of concerns in therapy and assessment, including anxiety disorders, adjustment disorders, and neurodiversity. So welcome to this diverse and thoughtful and experienced panel. And I would like to, I guess, first ask you all to share a little bit of your ideas on what it is that we can all do at this moment in time to look after our own mental health and to help others who may need extra support and care. Dr. Rosenfeld, why don't you start?
I'm sitting here thinking about how big of a question that is. To reuse an overused phrase of the last 18 to 24 months, we are in unprecedented times. However, I think in my experience, my view, there's a lot of things that we can do to take care of ourselves, our mental health, and a lot of that kind of stems from community. And I think in the last year and a half, we've really been deprived, many of us have been deprived of community in the ways that we've come to expect it, in the ways that we've practiced it. In the past, being able to gather in person, we've been gathering in Zoom rooms over phone calls and all these different mediums. And so I think we have to get creative, but essentially we don't need to try to reinvent the wheel. And I think when we, try to respond to the crisis by reinventing the wheel, we get overwhelmed very quickly. And so the short answer would be, how do we do the things that we've always done, but do them in a different way while maintaining our safety? So can we connect with loved ones or community, our community, whatever that is, if it's blood family or chosen family, in ways that are meaningful, while staying safe in whatever that means in the current context. So gathering in, rooms like this, making sure that we hold those milestone moments as authentically as we can. Can we gather? I'm thinking about, the holidays coming up. Many people have different traditions in the fall and winter. So can we, gather around our tables, and is there something we need to do maybe to change that? Does there need to be more structure to our meal so that we can all feel connected without, missing that in-person experience if that's not possible? And I think by taking the lead and by doing that, we're helping others, we're creating that platform. That's my not so short answer.
Thank you. Dr. Bush, Dr. Coffee, please just jump in whenever. Don't be overly polite. We'll figure it out.
Okay, you're right, Jessica. I don't know that there can be a short answer at all. I mean, on any given day, there's a different answer for that question. How do you take care of yourself today? Because I think each day is kind of presents itself with new challenges and new opportunities each time. So, but what I have this really ambitious bunch of folks that I see, very high functioning. They hold themselves to such a high standard. And one of the things that I'm noticing in my my population of patients is they're so disappointed with themselves for not being able to maintain a standard that was like pre-COVID. And they were already having anxiety about, not performing to whatever standard. I don't know where they got these standards from, but they have such high standards. And now they're still trying to strike that same bar, and everything has changed. So I'm really having to have people like, it's okay to step back and reassess what is doable and manageable in a safe and healthy way today. It's very different than what it was yesterday. And I'm pretty sure tomorrow will yet change again. So just managing their personal self-expectations. Jerry.
Would you like to add anything?
I'm always wondering when I've worked with your husband, I go by Jerry too. So I don't know if you call me Jerry, I get confused. But I think, first of all, the population of patients I see are a little different. One of the first people I saw that was afflicted by the pandemic had been a tour bus driver. So he had schizophrenia, but he did pretty well because he was able to sort of get by just driving a tour bus, and it kept him around people, but he didn't really have to interact. All he did was drive. So unfortunately, because of the pandemic, he lost his job, and then he started to kind of go downhill because he wasn't around people anymore. I think for everybody, whether they're super high functioning or whether they're a street person or an unsheltered homeless person, they're still under a much greater degree of stress, either from exposure to the disease and getting sick or being isolated. I think it's had a pretty significant impact on everybody. Last year, I know at one of our local universities, the administration became really concerned about the students and their isolation. One of the ideas we had was based on a model. There was something like it in the movie Ad Astra with Brad Pitt, where he would sort of check in each day with this computer system. And they'd even developed, one of our faculty in the computer science division a few years ago had developed something called an autonomous computer-based behavioral health countermeasure device for astronauts that are going to be traveling to Mars. And the paper starts off, these are people who are in a highly isolated environment by themselves for a prolonged period of time and need to be able to have some way to address their anxieties and moods and that sort of thing. So they developed a computer system. This one sort of used cognitive therapy. But one of the ideas for helping people on a more massive basis, or what they call scaled, are mental health apps, things that they can check in with each day, and they can kind of monitor and let them know, hey, you're doing okay, which is sometimes something everybody needs to hear, but is not necessarily able to. There might not be anyone around or other people around that aren't doing well either, and may not be able to give them that feedback. So that field is called digital psychiatry or digital mental health apps. And those are things that are being developed, sort of modeled after this idea for people that are going on prolonged space flight, but applied to people who are isolated by the pandemic. So that's another strategy to help people. Not something that's immediately available today, I'm sorry, but just potentially helpful thing for everyone, for people that are kind of stuck and can't pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, or maybe kind of sinking, but not even be aware of it.
So thank you. That's I love that you three highlighted, different solutions and perspectives. One of the things that is coming up for me is that even though that particular app is not available, there is, of course, social media, but that's a controversial thing, right? The World Health Organization actually recommends limiting time on social media at this time, because some of those stories can be distressing. Some people during the pandemic have been doom scrolling and falling into conspiracy theories and paranoia as well, experiencing mounting anxiety over the actual news. So how do we balance the connection that is possible with social media and technology, the community building that Jessica alluded to, that Dr. Rosenfeld alluded to, the need to feel informed and in control, with the need also to guard our spirits from worry and anxiety, and of course prevent ourselves from falling into holes of conspiracy theories and becoming obsessed with the numbers of dying and that sort of thing. What do you recommend for those of you, especially Dr. Rosenfeld, Dr. Coffee, you are clinicians. So this is something that must come up in your practice. So maybe you two one of you can speak to that first.
Alana, do you have any initial thoughts? I think I'm still formulating my my answer.
I'm going to put myself on mute and ask Siri.
Well, I know that for me, and I'll jump in, that I think that I've seen families effectively implement sort of a no phone zone, where there is a place of sanctuary, and there are times when they are getting their kids and themselves to reconnect with nature, to go old school, to read books, to sit in a hammock, to be in the ocean. And that seems to be an important thing to schedule. I think that there are perhaps, I'm thinking about what is present in Dr. Bush's mental health app, this idea of being able to check in and use opportunities, finding a mentor or finding a partner in health or a presence partner. One of the things that I did during the pandemic lockdown was I got together with my friend Lala online, and we meditated together online. And so kind of thinking about the myriad potential uses of technology, but also limiting and making sure that we find access to non-tech sources, especially if we're learning online, going to school online and communicating with our colleagues. But yeah, what else comes up for you two, or for any of you?
So, Dr. Bush, are you ready to go? I'll wait.
You must be pretty good at reading people. No, I was going to say something, but I don't want to interrupt you either. So I was just thinking, in the social media thing, with finding out the other day about the algorithms that Facebook was using to optimize their performance at basically the cost of human integrity. It seems like that social media isn't necessarily a bad thing, but what we're being exposed to are social media algorithms that engage human attention, but not for any beneficent purpose, but just to sort of further the ends of the corporation that's sponsoring the media. There's not any study that the social media has done to show that it's healthy for people, or no controlled types of studies showing that it's good. And what would be nice would be to hear that they are, that someone twisted their arm to do research to make the social media healthy, to promote health and not to promote some of the worst things that are going on in our culture right now, which is some of the intense divisiveness and negative self-image in comparison to other people and that sort of thing. So I agree with the idea of taking a break. I like to put my phone down every day for about a minute. I usually last 15 seconds, but then I pick it back up. But I have a period of serenity, and I thought it was particularly terrible when I had an Apple Watch that I used when I went surfing to kind of keep track of things. That was probably the most evil thing that happened to me. But I don't know that there's anything particularly bad in and of itself. The social media is sort of a vehicle, but when it's hooked up to algorithms that are just meant to further the company's interests and not human interests, then we have something potentially terrible. So I do think it's important to insulate ourselves from it, like you're suggesting. That was all, and thanks, Siri. Good answer.
So I have this patient, I think I can say that her name is Alexa, because there's a lot of Alexas now, but whenever I say her name, the blue light goes on. So I have to really disconnect Siri when doing, especially working with this one patient, because she'll start talking back. There's like 3 of us in session at that time. It's really strange, but I actually have enjoyed having the tech facilitator for therapy right now. It has been fabulous. Now, I'm not talking specifically about social media, because I haven't found a way to do that safely. Like, I haven't created a Facebook group or anything like that, but the Zoom rooms or Google Meets or all of those things, it's really been wonderful way of staying connected, and in a way that surprising. I did run a yoga group with some of my folks that needed to keep moving. Early last year, we were all trying to follow this one woman on YouTube via Zoom, and it was a mess. And we were all just in various stages of disarray. It was 7 a.m. There were cats, there were dogs, there were husbands. It was a mess, but it was just a wonderful mess. And we came together, and it was really a safe and vulnerable space at the same time, but we kept moving. So I loved Zoom for that. And then before, the lockdowns, I run women's groups, and I've always loved to keep women connected via therapy group. And they swore it. They're like, this won't work. We can't possibly do it if we're not in person, because we used to like to look at each other's shoes and all sorts of things, and just that physical connectivity, they were so certain it was going to get lost, but it didn't. What it did allow, we could eat together. We brought each other's pets and plants and spouses sometimes into the space. It was just like you could see people's kids walking back and forth. It just became more living room like, and it was closer. It brought us closer than just in my office. And so I think I'll probably miss this forum, this format when we go back in person. But we found a way to make it work and a way to make it meaningful for women. We had tea parties. It was really great. So I'm grateful to Zoom for now.
Well, and I think as you're talking, I think about this idea of the vulnerability that has changed. I think one of the things that I hear a lot, and there's, like Jerry was saying, there's not a lot of research in terms of double-blind studies about the impact of social media on our mental health, but I think it's fairly widely accepted that social media presents an idealized version of our life. We get to control the narrative, and that's where it can be very difficult at times for self-esteem and identity, self-identity. And there's almost a flip side of that with Zoom. You can't hide what's going on in the room around you. And I remember early on in the pandemic talking with colleagues who were working with patients who were agoraphobic, who weren't leaving the house, or who maybe we didn't realize you had a hoarding tendency. And then you Zoomed us into your living room and we were like, oh my goodness, there's a dynamic here that I wasn't appreciating when we were in the office environment. I'm not saying that we then diagnose people with a hoarding disorder. There's a lot more nuance there, but I think about self-care, right? What is it that we need? And sometimes we need the illusion of control. We need to feel like I know everything that's happening on my Facebook news feed. And even though that's really an illusion, because there's so much happening that we don't know, that we're not being shown, that we don't see. But sometimes we need to feel that for 30 seconds. There's no one size fits all, or 5 minutes, or an hour. There's no one size fits all solution. It's about like that check-in. And sometimes we need that more authentic, vulnerable connection. There's no one answer, but I find myself talking a lot with patients about, it's a metaphor I picked up and I don't remember what magazine article it was in, or I would credit it, but it kind of breaks down this idea of self-care. I think we've learned to kind of talk about self-care like I'm going to go have a piece of cake or eat a hamburger. And sometimes that is self-care. We need to indulge. And sometimes self-care is eating a salad because my body is tired and it doesn't feel good and I need to put something healthy and rejuvenating, and that's going to take more effort and maybe not be as much fun, but it's ultimately going to be what I need to heal or to feel better. So I was thinking about all that as you were talking.
Well, can I ask you to plunge a little deeper into that? So obviously COVID has disrupted a lot of life. And I wanted to ask you to speak a little bit about the importance perhaps of routine, of personal and sleep hygiene, of healthful eating, of exercise, of pleasure. How do we nourish ourselves in the midst of this isolation and deprivation? And can you speak a little more about that?
Yes. Again, a question with no simple answer and no one size fits all solution, but I think I'm just going to zero in there, dig in a little bit on the routine part of that question. I think that's something that maybe is the most, to me, tangible. How do we keep our routines in a time and a place? I mean, I'm chuckling because it almost feels routine now. We've been doing this for so long. There's so many layers to it, right? And I think the first thing we have to figure out is, what is the barrier, right? If I'm having a hard time doing the things that I know were helpful to me before, whenever before was, what's in the way? Is there a physical barrier? I have to social distance and I can't go to a concert, which is what I used to do to blow off steam, because they're not happening right now. Okay, so that's sort of a different response than I'm just feeling really overwhelmed and I don't know where to start. That's something we can, you can work with that. Can we break it down? Can we take it a small step at a time? We know routine is helpful for mental health. And, one of the things for those working from home, having that space, this is my workspace. I'm separating it physically from the rest of my life space, my work things, whatever they may be, computer, notebooks, iPads, whatever you use. They're staying separate from my home life as much as we can. That can be very helpful. Putting on clothes, different clothing to go to work in, that is very helpful. And all of this is part of a routine. I think we often think about routine as a schedule that we have to follow, but that can be part of your routine. I'm working from an office now, but I was up until recently working from home. I would put makeup on every day. That was part of my work routine. I had shirts that I only wore when I was working, and that, you only see me from the waist up when I'm teleworking. So, shirts and earrings and things. And that really helped separate the day. After I would, get up from my desk when I was done working for the day, and I would change my clothes, take off the jewelry, and then join my family. So small steps, baby steps. That's where I would start. But there's a lot more there. Maya, that's a good question.
Does anyone else want to tackle that? Or
I love that answer, Jessica.
Yeah, me too. Great answer.
It was. I just wanted to add that, there's a routine, an emotional routine that people are going through, and it looks like a grief cycle. And it's cycling rather quickly because people are getting troubling news on a regular basis. So finding their baseline that Jessica is talking about, that center and that equilibrium and that sense of peace, is sometimes fleeting because they might have gotten it and then get bad news the next day. Because there's more than just a pandemic that's actually on people's minds. There's so many more things, and especially with the younger children who are less afraid of the pandemic in terms of health, they've got all kinds of social justice issues that are troubling them. And so I keep watching people have to reset the routine of their emotional rhythm and clock, from being devastated and hurt one day and angry to some sort of acceptance and then the next day they get upset again. So finding a routine with an emotional process is actually part of what we've been doing. One of the reasons for the group, so that we can help people be vigilant against not getting stuck in a grief cycle, because it's just, the news has been challenging in frequent cycles, if that makes any sense.
it makes a lot of sense. And, I think a little bit of what, I think is also helpful is this idea of maybe new habit formation. I think of, I know that Dr. Bush was making a joke about setting his phone down for a minute, right? But we can do things like 2-minute meditations, 2 minutes of watching things in motion, 2 minutes of counting our breath, 2 minutes of walking as slowly as possible from one space to the next, 2 minutes of checking in with what we can see, smell, taste, those mindful things, and building those into the day is a way to sort of recalibrate at various turns. And I think that's in keeping with what you are saying, Dr. Coffee, this need to kind of find a way to engage in reflective practice, to check in with ourselves, to feel a boost of energy and a moment of connection, however brief that is. But something that you said makes me also want to ask the question of, frontline communities. You made mention of the fact that we have been dealing with a lot of racial divide and violence, a lot of violence against Black bodies, violence against Asian bodies. And I think that this is a time of continued uncertainty, and we need to think about those conflicts as central to the experience of our young people, especially, even if they are in Hawaii, and much of it is happening on the continent. And there is a lot here in Hawaii too, in the way of sort of frontline communities who have been suffering more and to a much greater extent than other communities, right? In terms of not having access to digital tools, not having as much space, and so having large numbers of family members getting sick simultaneously, not having access to healthcare, right? So these frontline communities here in Hawaii and elsewhere have suffered to a much greater extent than others during COVID, from COVID, as well as from violence. And so can you folks all speak about how do we build that community resistance and resilience and grow greater justice and equity for those frontline communities here and elsewhere when it comes to public health. You know, part of this question is, you know, what investments in public health do you think that we should make, you know, that recognizes the knowledge and gifts of frontline communities, but also the great needs, and how do we listen to these communities and find community source solutions? I know that was a big question. So feel free to tackle any part of it.
Well, one thing that I think would help is the very concept of community. I think when you say community, people think of their neighborhood they live in and the people around them, which is their community. But we also have the community of our city and the community of Hawaii, of our state. And then there's the American community. So community is a unifying envelope that helps address the disease of divisiveness. So that's one thing. I think there's a loss of the concept of community, that although I might find someone else's beliefs terrible and repugnant, that they're and we are members of the same community, and we may be sort of developing this intense polarization that has really been there almost since the time that George Washington united the 13 colonies. He had to make some deals with the southern colonies because there weren't enough people to fight the British. One of the deals, even though he was against it, was to include or accept the fact that the southern colonies had still legalized slavery, whereas the northern colonies had already outlawed it. And that sort of baked the issues of racial inequity, baked it in the cake of American culture, and it's been sort of stuck there. There's not any way to necessarily legislate it out. I think they tried to do that with the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment, and there was still a lot of issue with white supremacy. So in terms of healing some of the inequities, I think the idea of community, that we're all members of the same community. Community resilience, I know from my public health studies, is a concept. It's a systems platform for public health. It basically is a measure of how well a community can use its resources to withstand stress. And I think a lot of our communities are stretched. It's something that has to be built by bystander interaction and people helping each other and becoming more familiar and linking different sorts of resources and things like that. I know it was part of the foundation for something called the National Health Security Strategy, which was supposed to be a system in place to help Americans feel more secure about their health. So that seems like it's also completely disappeared. But I don't want to keep rambling about anything because I'm learning a lot from my co-speakers here, so I'll let them talk a little bit too.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Jerry. One of my favorite theorists is a man named Yuri Bronfenbrenner, and he talks about the things that Dr. Bush was talking about, whether it's an individual, a household, a neighborhood, a community, a country, and really eventually a planet, a globe, because we're really all connected on this, ball in space. And then this concept of history, I think, is, to me, actually really encouraging, because historically humans somehow find every now and then the way to do a thing right. And we tend to come together and we help each other out. And so we see this pattern again and again historically. So for example, the suicide rate in 2020 has decreased from years in the past. And you know, researchers looked at that and were kind of surprised, because I think they would have thought it would have gone up because there's so much stress and anxiety. So they went back and looked at other events in history and found that whenever the United States in particular has an attack that is a macro system attack where everyone is attacked, then the community tends to come together and get closer to each other. Just have a contraction that's natural. I think the challenge is it doesn't tend to last for very long, but we are seeing that happen here in Hawaii, where, you know, there has been a pandemic and people definitely pull together as a community, and we see those suicide numbers decrease at a time like this. And part of that's because there's now permission to talk about pain and anxiety and stress and fear, and it doesn't look weak. I mean, like, it takes a pandemic in some cases to give some people permission to talk about their vulnerabilities, but they are. And so right now we're still feeling some of that, I think, as a community, where people are making space, giving permission, giving support, because it has been a scary thing. My concern is what happens when we start having compassion fatigue and that thing wears off. I just want to know, how do we keep it alive, this thing called compassion and empathy for ourselves as a community, as neighbors, as individuals? Jessica, how do we do that, honey?
Oh man, too bad I already wrote my dissertation. You know, as we've been talking, I've been thinking about, not to name drop more famous psychologists, but Irv Yalom writes in his book Love's Executioner, which is a great read, but a collection of stories from his time working as a therapist. He is a psychiatrist, and he writes about this one patient. I believe the patient's name in the book, I don't know if it's his real name, is Carlos. And Carlos has cancer, and he's very gruff. And Yalom describes him as somebody who he had a really hard time connecting with, and who was sort of pushing everyone away in his grief. You know, he knew he was dying and he wanted to be left alone. And the conclusion, not to spoil it for anyone, but the conclusion of Carlos's story is that Carlos realizes, he has this epiphany one day, which I wish it worked this way in my therapy, but Yalom is quite talented. And he comes in and he tells Yalom, everybody has a heart. And I spent my day walking around looking at the person at the supermarket. He has a heart. The woman walking down the street with the baby in the carriage, she has a heart. And just sort of recognizing the humanity within. And I think, as Jerry was saying, the way to come together is to build community and to recognize community in places, you know, where we might not naturally think of it as occurring, and cross those lines, reach across those barriers. COVID has given us a common enemy, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But I think we have to, be thinking about, what have I learned from this? I think there's almost a taboo. And certainly there's been a lot of language about, you know, oh, I learned to bake sourdough bread during the pandemic, and it's okay if you didn't learn anything and you just hurt. And is there anything that we can take from this experience to say, how do I be a better citizen of the world, to my fellow neighbor, and see the heart in the person walking down the street, and sort of these very nuanced and multi-leveled pandemics that we've been facing over the last, many, many years, if we're talking about historical.
One way I feel like you've just illuminated is, I think, this idea of service, right? A way to avoid compassion fatigue is to take it out of the abstract and sort of materialize it with our work, our actions, our commitments, and helping others. I think there is, I think, a real antidote to loneliness in finding servant leadership during this time, thinking how we can help in small and potentially large ways, right? Are we able to be an accompaniment to elders who are worried, to shop for them, to give our laptops to those in need who are on the wrong side of the digital divide? You know, how can we support workers and mental health professionals by bringing in musubi, or in New York at 8 o'clock, you know, ringing the bells and cheering and everyone clapping, just offering a boost of morale and support and love, right? And those are actions that can make us feel connected, perhaps, to a sense of purpose during this time, that can eliminate the despair that comes, or the fatigue that come. You know, if we keep serving, we become and feel more empowered, and we can find new ways to amplify, to engage in policy transformation. Can we participate in a community gathering talking about public safety and policing? Can we, you know, can we be an advocate? Can we help a child? So I wanted to ask you, what are your favorite things in terms of service and servant leadership? What are the things that you have seen, perhaps, that have made you feel buoyant and optimistic about this time? You know, do you have stories that you've seen of tenderness and connection and care?
I think we have really great role models here, like Father Damien and others, that sort of set a standard for us that that we could never reach, but that still sort of show the way for that sort of thing. And I know that one of the doctors in the emergency room brought in a chest full of, no, not beer, but ice water, bottled water for everybody, and some soft drinks and things like that. I think people writing little notes, not just to the doctors and nurses, but to people in dietary and housekeeping and all the people in the hospital, is kind of a nice thing. I know when people come into the psychiatric emergency room, the staff, when they come in, we all shout out "Irashaimase," which just means welcome and come in, but it makes them feel like they're going in a Japanese restaurant too. So those are just a couple little answers to your question.
I think that Hawaii is like one of the most generous and warm places that I've ever been, and I've done a fair amount of moving around. It's one of the things I miss most, but this place is very, very generous. And so I always hesitate to ask more, because I think people are, you know, already doing so much. But I just want to say, for everybody who sent me a text, a message, or, you know, letter, and even food in the mail, I just want to say thank you, because I think there are people who are teachers, doctors, police people, fire people, the man that delivers my honey water. Like, there's people who are out there working really, really hard, and they're either somewhat invisible, or people assume they don't need an attaboy or an attagirl or a shout out. But, you know, send your child's teacher a message of thank you, because people had to reinvent their jobs in the last 2 years. They didn't know how to do it, and they were brave and courageous, and they did it anyway. So just say thank you to some people that you just might not realize, that the people, the cashier, checkout lady, like, what are you still doing here? You know, they never quit. So, you know, just saying thank you to people, I think is huge. It goes a long way. Because Hawaii is very generous. We already know you donate lots of money, but also say thank you.
I love the simplicity of that answer. In both of your answers too, in that we know gratitude and expressing gratitude is helpful for our mental health. And so I know for myself, I'm a type A, gold star motivated kind of person. You know, I think about, okay, I'm going to do an act of service. I have to go collect food for everybody on my block. You know, oh, wow, that's really overwhelming and stressful. You know what? I can't, I have, you know, analysis paralysis, and now nothing happens. And then I feel bad because I didn't do anything. So I think it's what is the small act that you can do in that moment. I love the idea of just saying thank you to the people you see every day. I read an article in, I think it was in one of the major newspapers, might have been the New York Times, where they actually looked at most people are no longer working from home in our country. I don't know what the statistics are for Hawaii, but you know, countrywide, nationwide, like most people are not working from home anymore. And so those who are have a bias to think that everybody else is. But I think it's interesting to think about, there are so many people moving through the world, and just that simple act of saying thank you or holding the door. Or maybe you notice that your neighbor's got a flat tire, you know, can you help them out? It doesn't have to be just a response to the big picture, right? But how can we support each other in small little ways?
Well, thank you. We're soon to run out of time. So I want to end with just the question, you know, because I want to have that strength-based approach of what you are looking forward to in the year ahead. You know, what gives you strength and hope? And as people who have been at the center of this storm, in many ways, what are you looking to see when you emerge from the storm? But also, you know, how are you navigating, and what are you navigating towards? And, you know, what are you looking forward to in the pathway ahead?
Well, besides all the things I enjoy doing, like writing and teaching the residents, a book I read on pandemics sort of showed a pattern that when a pandemic ends, there's like an age of enlightenment. So I'm hoping there'll be some sort of period of enlightenment when this is over. That's my secret wish.
I'm looking forward to many different things, but I think, as you said, Maya, I feel like I've seen this pandemic from a very unique angle. And I am an early career psychologist, which means I'm within 10 years of earning my degree. And this pandemic hit in year one of my being licensed for independent practice. So I feel like it has really fundamentally and will fundamentally impact the way that I practice and provide clinical care. And I'm really grateful for the lesson that it's learned. I didn't enjoy the lesson in the moment, but I'm grateful that I had to kind of gain some confidence in myself because I was working so independently by myself in my home. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what that feels like in the next age of enlightenment, as we transition back, the opportunities that maybe I took for granted before, being able to really engage with them and apply some of those lessons or findings with my work, being patient, learning how to slow down and not expect things to happen right away is the concrete one that comes to mind. And I'm looking forward to that age of enlightenment and live theater again, personally.
I see it in the chat that out of the bubonic plague came the Renaissance, right? So it's that I'm looking forward to what happens next too. I'm looking forward to moving and traveling a little bit. I think that it's been very difficult to be apart from families who don't all live here in this state or on the islands. So having people come and visit safely, and for us to be able to go and just hug some of these people safely again. We're missing our family members, and I'm looking forward to connecting with some friends that way. And you know, I recognize that I've seen this pandemic from a somewhat privileged seat, because I have had the opportunity to work from home. It's felt very safe. And for my patients who are out there not being very safe, I'm really grateful that, you know, safety is on the horizon for them. That I'm looking forward to that.
Well, I thank you all for being navigational leaders, helping us collectively to navigate through this storm. And for those in attendance today, I hope that you are taking something away, whether it's about balancing offline activities and online with your daily routine, or using your social media accounts to promote positive and hopeful stories and correcting misinformation, or being kind and really thinking about how to be upstanders with discrimination, or, you know, how to support healthcare workers. I do hope that you find one thing to implement, to try to take with you for self-care, for better communication, and for greater service. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to our fearless Hawaii Book and Music Festival leader, Roger, for some closing words. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. I think Siri learned a great deal from this panel. I'd just like to say to attendees that if you want to see this again, or if your friends did not catch it, it will be available on our YouTube channel and the Better Tomorrow speaker series. And then we will have it edited for the highlights. That's going to be a tough job for this one. And that will be up on our website for at least a year. So again, thank you very much. It was a really great session. Aloha.